Hello everyone, and thank you very much for joining this live event. Today we continue our discussion on Spring Security with CORS, crossover resource sharing, which is a mechanism that we will discuss and demonstrate with examples today. Thank you very much for being here with me. Remember, you have a live chat and you can ask questions and start discussions in the live chat. And if you're watching the event recorded, you can still ask the questions and leave your comments in the comment section, or find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. With that being said, I think it's time for me to share you my screen, and I want to first discuss about what CORS is. And after that, we will step into a new project, create a project, and demonstrate the configurations for CORS. So that's the plan for today. And you see my usual tool I use for diagrams here. You know, I have a browser and I have a server, and let's figure out when CORS happens. So normally someone accesses a web app from their browser through a request, and they get back a response, and they see the interpreted HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and stuff like that. So usually the things are pretty smooth because we have the only origin, so only one origin meaning where does the content come from. So in our case, the server that you see as an example here with the green icon or whatever that is, and then it gets back the response. And then what happens is that besides being served with the content, the web apps usually for a long time already, they now execute requests behind the scenes. The JavaScript applications or JavaScripts that are executed by the browser, they might send requests and get answers and dynamically update the page. And this is nothing new. We have this for many years. So I'm using this since Ajax was just discovered, jQuery was still a thing, and dinosaurs ruled the earth. Now we know that this happens a lot, and we have different ways in which things work better within frameworks, and I don't want to discuss about that because they are not my specialty. But the idea is that somehow the application behind the scenes has queries that query call endpoints, get back usually JSON response, and not only, and they interpret the response and they fill up the page somehow. So the problem is what happens if you have multiple origins. And the idea is that it might happen sometimes, like usually for developers, this happens a lot, at least in the local development environment, because in many cases they have maybe a Spring Boot application or a Spring app, doesn't matter. They put it up, it's running on, say, localhost 8080, like we usually do with our Spring Boot applications, but then they are also implementing the front end, or they are simply running the front end, and then the front end runs on a different port, and this port might differ depending on the framework. But if you use Angular or React or Vue, or simply have a different Tomcat instance where you run your front end, then you already have two different origins, because even if it's localhost, only the simple change in the port will trigger the server to consider, we actually trigger the browser, sorry, to consider this a different. It's like it considers it a different server, and in the end, if you think about behind the scenes, it's a different application, so it's a different server, so it's no mistake on that. But the idea is that with this, well, if you don't usually make any special change to run this properly, you will face basically a CORS forbidden, and I will demonstrate this today, and you will be able to recognize it. So because that's the purpose. So the idea is that out of the box, calling out of the box this other origin should not work and usually will not work. And I see that this poses a problem usually for beginners, especially because they don't understand what happens, they don't understand what that error is and how can they get rid of it, and that's what we want to mitigate today. So normally out of the box only one origin is accepted, and it's always the origin from where the content has been downloaded. If you want your application to call different origins, then you have to loosen a bit what we call the CORS restrictions. And again, this is happens all the time on the local environment, but it may happen also in production. So I've seen many cases where developers implement something, say on example.com, but the queries are on a separate domain for different purposes that we don't have to discuss now. And in that case, well, it's the same thing. As long as you have a different origin, a different address, it's going to be seen as a different origin. And in this case, the CORS policies will apply restrictions. And if you want this to work, you need to loosen those restrictions. So today we learn about how this error looks like, and the restrictions that the way we need to loosen them in a way in which the application stays secure, because I think you already understand that these restrictions are there for a reason, and the reason is mainly, well, you don't want anyone to be able to access your APIs. That's one point. Secondly, it can cause different kinds of troubles if you expose your API, and you might have different vulnerabilities. Others from outside might try to profit from them. So you usually want to make sure as much as possible that you don't allow any browser to access your any browser client access your domain, and you only want to allow those that must be allowed. Okay, so you usually start from a restriction that is very rigid to only your domain, and of course I will show you today you can loosen it, but you still have to make sure that you don't loosen it too much. With that being said, let's go back actually to work, and let's create a project. We need a very simple project today for our demonstration. So we used to, let me see how we used to call this, SS 2022, because we started in 2022, and then I think today is the 19th lesson, and this is the first example. And we have web, and we have security, and that's everything we need for today. We don't need a very big project stuffed with a lot of dependencies. I will close the other window of IntelliJ to spare some resources and have things working hopefully a little bit faster. And then we will have everything being indexed, and I will just create a small web page. I will have to do something that I don't usually like to do, like write a JavaScript to call from this page an endpoint, a very simple endpoint, and then firstly we need to prove this is working, and then we need to prove when this is not working, and then we need to make it work again. So let's see if the time allows us for all these examples. It should. So I need a web page. I will create a very simple web page, index HTML by default. What else do I need? So I need also some controllers. I need at least a controller, an MVC controller. So I will actually use the controller annotation, not the REST controller. I will use controller because this should direct me to a web page. So in this case, my index HTML, and I will just map this, if you want, to the root, and then I will also create a REST controller, which will be something like demo controller, and which will expose a REST endpoint. something very simple again. And again, I will use get. And one thing maybe is good mentioning from the very beginning, if you saw the previous lesson, which was on CSRF protection, cross-site request forgery, we know CSRF protection is applied only to mutating operations, post, put, delete, and get is not affected. In terms of CORS, everything is affected by CORS. Even the get operations. So unlike CSRF, this really applies even to get. So that's why I will create this get mapping, and I will be able to use it and demonstrate my examples with get, and I don't need something else like a mutative operation. So CSRF, and please review the previous lessons in case this is not clear. It's a kind of attack that's applicable only for mutating operations. That's why get is spared, and it's the protection is only applied for everything that's a method, the HTTP method, that should be applicable with mutating operations. In case of CORS, it's just crossover request resource sharing, which means any kind of resource. There is not a restriction on some specific kind of a resource. Any kind of resource is affected, so any kind of endpoint, including the get endpoints. So that's why this should work for me. And one other thing, just to make things a lot easier, let me get completely out the authentication and authorization, because by default now, if I would start the application and I would try to access any page, you know already from previous examples, from previous lessons we discussed on this playlist, that by default Spring Security will configure all the endpoints to be at least authenticated, and I don't want that. I want, on this case, like I did for the CSRF last time, for CORS as well, I'd like us to focus on CORS and only CORS, which is not directly related to the authentication and authorizations, and I want to prove that by first of all disabling anything on the endpoint, so I don't want to have to log in at all. Okay, so config, and here it is, security config. I will add the configuration annotation, and define a security filter chain bean, like we usually do now with Spring Security 6, using the bean annotation to make sure this is part of the context. I will probably have to throw the exception, so let's do that. And we return it using the build method, and then of course what I want to do is mention that all requests are permitted, no authentication is required whatsoever. So we only discuss CORS. Okay, let me start this, try to access the page and make sure that the authentication is no longer active, and then let me put in place some JavaScript code to call this demo endpoint here. So the index endpoint is the page itself, it's a controller, it only defines the page. The demo endpoint is what we will call, it's our Ajax request if you want. So localhost 8080, and it's a blank page, so that means it worked, it's fine, it has the title because that's what I wrote, and the network simply shows no problem. It can show at least that we call localhost and we have a 200. Okay, so no authentication or authorization issue. Now I'm going to the index, and it's been some time since I last time wrote JavaScript code, because guys, remember, I'm a backend developer, so I'm not usually into this. And by the way, I will simply use here plain JavaScript, but what I discuss applies to any kind of framework or library you would use. Again, I've been there the times when jQuery was still a thing, and if I would use jQuery, for example, I would have still gone into CORS issues the same way. If I would use Angular, React, or something else, the same thing will happen. So it's regardless on how I write the query, I will write it as plain JavaScript, because honestly, at the moment is the simplest way to do it. I don't need to add any library, specific library or framework. And secondly, I'm not sure that I know to do something else by heart, because again, it's been some time since I last time wrote JavaScript. So what I want to actually do is to make sure that I call this function when the page loads, and I should have something like var h new XML HTTP request. Here it is, and then say on ready state change, and define a function for on ready state change where if, I think it was something like this, ready state is 4, which meant that everything went fine, and status of the response is 200, okay, something like this. Oh, sorry for this, should be like that. And then I will just say h1 or whatever you want, give it an ID, output, and say document get element by ID output. In the inner HTML, add the response. Okay, and I don't need a semicolon because this is JavaScript, so I can spare the semicolon. And then I just say open get HTTP localhost 8080 demo and send the request. And I hope this is going to work. Okay. You can just use just fetch API exist, but I was just saying before that I don't want to use something special. I'm not sure if JavaScript comes now out of the box with something, or I have to add something, but I don't want to do that because, again, I'm not a front-end developer. I don't know front-end very well, and I don't want to learn it, to be honest with you. So this thing is for our today's purpose demonstration. Regardless of the way you will do that, this way, or using fetch API, or using another library, I don't care. It will get into the same situation, which is the course we want to discuss. Okay, so please allow me to use this the way I know it. And again, trust me, I don't know how to write it in a different way. And trust me, I don't want even to learn how to write it in a different way in terms of front end. Okay. So let's check that whatever I wrote here is fine. I'm going back, and actually it looks like I have it called, and I get 200. I'm not sure why I don't see it here, because I would have expected to see it in the output, no, the response text here, to see the demo or whatever that is in the output. So it looks to me like something is strange, but anyway, I got 200 okay from the call. So the call has been done, and I got it back. Okay. So the question is this, did this actually work? So I used localhost 8080 demo, and I was calling it from the same origin. So this worked, and we had no CORS problems. Now, if I would go here and change this with, say, 127.0.0.1, which is basically the same thing, it's theoretically directly in the same machine, but in terms of strings is different. So that means that the browser will actually compare the strings. It will not work. Okay, so that's the problem. So what we should prove here is that when we use this, it will not work. Okay, so let me see if that's the case. Oh, and here it is, the CORS error. So we proved the problem. It's even if 127.0.0.1 and localhost theoretically means the same thing, the browser will see this as a different origin. And yes, you might have a different port, you might have totally different everything. That's not important. Again, I was starting by telling you the example with the port, but it's not mandatory to have the port different. Okay, it can be anything in the address. It can be the port, the name, the DNS, or both of them. In my case, because I can't change the port, like I would have had to create a different service. Fine, I could have done that, but let's not spare our time with things that are not really relevant for us now. I demonstrated by simply faking a different origin using the loopback address instead of oh, this status. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, it can be, but being is JavaScript, it's not, there is no compilation error, so I simply got into the send without having a problem here. Probably that's why basically the demo didn't appear on my page, but the request was done. But again, it's irrelevant. So I corrected it, and I will run it again just for making this correction, but it's the same result. So again, what we are interested in is the CORS error we have here, which happens because of a different origin. We can even go back to the console, and in the console you will see this message. Remember this message. If it's the first time you see it and you didn't have it in a real world application, trust me, at some point you will have it in a real world application. Okay, so whenever you see something like the request from origin to this has been blocked by CORS policy blah 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 blah, this means you have a CORS problem. This means your JavaScript tries to call endpoints on a different origin. Sometimes it's only the origin, sometimes CORS applies some restrictions also on some headers, but in most cases it's because of the origin, and this is what you will see with your applications as well. How do we solve this? How do we loosen the restrictions in such a way in which I can leave my JavaScript code here untouched but make it work? Well, the simplest but the rarest of the cases is using the CrossOrigin annotation. So what you can do is say HTTP localhost, not localhost, 127.0.0. It's the origin. Which is the origin actually? Sorry for that. I'm going back to my console. So from origin localhost, so localhost is the origin. So localhost 8080 is an allowed origin, and now the demo endpoint should be able to be called from this origin as well. So let's see if that's the case. Okay, so I'm reloading my page. Demo finally appears. So the problem was my my typo in the code, which I have corrected thanks to Yavish. I hope I pronounced correctly your name. What we observe is that I should have actually cleared the console to demonstrate that we have no more CORS. Okay, see, no more CORS problems. So not only that, we can see now that the requests have been completely fulfilled, and because I corrected my JavaScript error there, now this line has been also executed, and bam, we see the response text in the H1 here. But we can see that in the console there is no more problem. We can see that in the network the demo requests have been successfully called. Now you can actually use the CrossOrigin on any endpoint, and you could actually do something like this which would imply any origin. So if I'm actually running it with the star, it will still work because star is even more loosened. This is something that you should never use in prod environments, so please don't use the star in prod environments. Mainly and very rarely in prod environments, again, you need CORS loosening, but when you do, make sure, the rule of thumb is make sure you enumerate precisely the origins that should be allowed. So even if it looks simple using a star, that's something you can do on your local environment because it's quicker. Okay, I can understand that when you have a, say, an Angular application and your Spring Boot backend and you want to make them allowed and you just put a star there and that's it, fine, good. But again, when you move that to production, make sure, or to a real environment that can be called by anyone, then make sure you precisely define the origins that are allowed. So don't use a star. Now, the CrossOrigin annotation is very rarely used anyway, because it would mean that I have to use it on any endpoint, and it's rarely the case where I have to only loosen the restrictions for a specific endpoint. If you have that, you have an endpoint and only for that endpoint you want to loosen the restriction, then CrossOrigin annotation makes sense. It's very easy to use. You just put it over the endpoint and instantaneously you have loosened the CORS policies for that endpoint. If you have one or a couple of endpoints, that works fine. If you have more endpoints or all your endpoints affected, or specific logic in which you want to define the loosening of the CORS restrictions, then the CrossOrigin annotation doesn't work anymore. So that's a good tool, but it's very, very rigid, and in my experience it's very unlikely you will use it with prod applications. Now let me show you which is the configuration that most likely you will use with prod applications. So HTTP CORS, we go back to our endpoint configuration, and here it is. You know already in the security filter chain, where we have already learned to configure the authentication, the authorization, the CSRF last time when we discussed. Now you learn that CORS is possible, and yes, it's possible. Now you go into the chaining configuration, or you can go into Lambda configuration. What you need to configure here for your case is called the configuration source. So if you go here, you will see the CORS configuration source is basically an interface with only one method. I'm not even sure if it has any thing that we can use. Maybe this one, I have to check it, but usually when I implemented stuff, I usually just implemented the interface myself with a very simple like this Lambda expression. So I just say this R is the request. So going back, you will see it's, this is the request, okay? And then what your method should return is a CORS configuration, and CORS configuration is basically something you can create. So it's just something CORS configuration config, new CORS configuration, like that, and then you return it, of course, and then you can configure whatever you want here. So you can just say set allowed origins, and then you enumerate the origins. You have to, oh sorry, it's a list of origins, so it's a list of, in my case, I can do like that, but again, in prod environments, remember that you always have to enumerate precisely. And of course, being here, what you can do is simply putting them in your application properties, profiles, and you might have different origins based on different profiles, meaning different origins based on different environments, which is something that's very likely you will need in real world applications, because real world applications are usually deployed in several environments. You at least have a dev environment, a user acceptance test environment, and the production environment, but you can have many others. And multiple environments, of course, mean different URLs mean different origins. So yes, then you need to apply different restrictions in different environments. So that's why you need to do that. Again, remember, it's always they have to be rigid. So I would prefer to see in your code something like localhost 8080 and never start. And this, you can move it again. So just take my word, move it into your application properties. You don't want to have hard-coded stuff like this in your code. Let me restart it and demonstrate that this is working. So, and of course, being that's code, you can apply logic. So you can say, depending on the request, I want to configure this and that. No, because you have the request here. So having the request, you have everything you need, including the URL. So here is where you can even programmatically define your CORS loosening rules. Very easy. So it's very easy. You can do whatever you want here. So I'm going back to my browser, and again we just demonstrate this works fine. So you see, even if we have different origins, we have proved that we can rule out the CORS policy problem. And yeah, this is just loosening a mechanism that already exists. You could deactivate it completely. I never recommend you do that. Again, you could set allowed origins for everything. Don't do that. So do basically enumerate precisely which are the origins you expect. Leave in place the CORS mechanism and make sure you keep it your application as secure as possible. So let me see if you have any other questions. From Smith JPA, please put it in a comment section, because I cannot change the subject and discuss about something else now. So just put your question in a comment, and I will come back if it's related to anything else than the current session. Can we replace localhost by the domain name in production? Not that you can, you must. So in my case, localhost is just because I run the application on my local environment, of course. But yes, in a real world scenario, again, what you would do is you would have, let me actually do that for you. So you would have multiple profiles, no? So let me do that. And then you would run it with the profile you need. So you will have, for example, a prod profile. You can take your list, say from here, and you inject it, say private string allowed origin, which you inject through the value annotation. You can call it whatever you want in your properties file. So you can have it something like this. It can be star, say application properties is what you use on the local, but prod is what you use on the production environment. So here you define whatever your production environment is, blah blah blah.com. Okay, so that's how you do it. Okay, and now you have it injected here. You take the name from here and you put it like that. And yes, if you want to have multiple, then you can use a list. I mean, it's just a way of doing it in Spring. This is Spring fundamentals, and I would expect you already know all this. In case of JavaScript, it's a little bit trickier, because JavaScript, well, you need to compile it this way. So you would have to have variables that you change at the moment of compiling. Like for example, when you use Angular or when you use React, you can define values for different profiles, and then you implement your pipeline to correctly create them with the proper values when the compilation happens, and then they are deployed on the container. But that's something else. And again, guys, I'm not going to detail on the front-end side because again, I'm not a front-end expert. So I hope that answers your question. And with that being said, we finished quite early today, and I'm happy that I managed to show you everything that I wanted. So the time allowed me to show you both the CrossOrigin and the CORS configurations, CORS configuration in the application properties files, in the configuration files, and using application properties files. And now hopefully you know how to step over this problem if you encounter it, and not only you know where it comes from, and you know how to properly configure it in production. Guys, thank you very much again for being here with me. I'm happy to have seen you again, and I'm looking forward to having you here for the next lessons. Until we meet again, I'm waving goodbye and saying you have an excellent time for learning. Cheers, everyone.